Hi, I'm Andrew, and this is Blaster Breakdown. Today, the Max Striker. This is a great blaster out of the box, but today I'll show you a number of improvements that you can make to this blaster that are either free or very cheap to implement that make for a better user experience and maybe a little more power. Before we start though, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Right, let's have a look inside. Okay, now pretty much the first thing I do on all my mods is take these screws out and chuck them away. Instead, I replace them with these hex head or socket cap screws. You can get these from eBay. Just search for self-tapping screws, hex or socket, and you should find these. They're available in a variety of sizes. M2.6 is what the Max Striker and most Nerf blasters really take. Some need bigger ones, M3, but M2.6 for the most part will do you. These are 10 or 12 millimeter length. You can get longer, you can get shorter. Now let's talk about locks. First of all, the safety. Safety hooks into the trigger and stops you pulling if it rubs against this knob and lets you pull if it's against the flat open area. I don't have any need for the safety. I don't want to keep it, so I always get rid of them. Now you could just remove the safety and have holes in the side of your blaster. You could buy or print a piece to slot in there that removes that little knob. You could just cut that knob out. For me, I like to keep the flush look on the sides of my blasters, so I just cut the last 10 millimeter off either side and I just glue them in place. There you can see I just cut it off, dab of glue each side, and you've got a nice flush, smooth, consistent look. That didn't cost you a cent. Still on locks, the next thing we'll talk about is the trigger lock. So this trigger lock has a couple of screws and a return spring holding it in place. And what this lock does is when your slide moves back, it forces this down. And you can see here, you can't pull the trigger. Once the slide moves all the way forward, it springs back up and you can then fire your blaster. So that does a few things. One, it means that you can't fire your blaster when the breech is open and you don't have a dart sealed in place, which is good. However, it also means that you can't deprime your blaster by pulling the trigger when the spring is compressed and easing it forward if you don't have a dart to fire. I like to be able to deprime the blaster, so I always get rid of this lock. The final lock is this pump slide lock. It's like a really long lever, pivots here, and it's got a spring here. This is a knob that sticks through the tack rail at the top that you can see when the blaster is closed. And what this does is when you prime the blaster, this part at the back of the plunger head presses up here, and that presses down on this part. So when you slide your pump forward to chamber the dart, this will click into place. And you then can't push the pump grip back until you fired a dart and the plunger tube's gone forward and this is released, and then you can move it again. Now again, that has a couple of effects. One is that once you've slid the pump grip forward and engaged this lock, you can't then deprime the blaster without pressing down this knob at the top of the tack rail, which pivots this up to allow it to slide back. Maybe that's something you want, maybe that's something you don't want. The benefit of this lock though is that once you've slid all the way forward and engaged the lock, you don't need your forward hand to hold the pump grip all the way forward because you know it's locked in place. Personally, I find sometimes I'll remove my left hand to do something and sometimes tilt the blaster upwards, taking cover behind a tree, for example. And without this lock, the grip would slide back, the breech would open, and before I knew it, I'd be chambering a second dart or a third dart sometimes. So for me, I do prefer to keep this lock in place because that gives me benefits the way I use it. And I know that if I do need to deprime, I've always got this button at the top of the rail to be able to slide back and deprime if I need to. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is a hair trigger mod. This is from a Nexus Pro. I just want to point out this angle is relatively flat. And what I found is that when you pull the trigger, it almost presses as much backwards on the catch as it does sort of underneath and pressing it upwards, which is the action we want. So what I've done is taken this bit of angled plastic and glued it on the end just to change that contact angle. So now, firstly, the trigger engages the catch much sooner with a trigger pull. You can see it's there's not much play before it begins engaging, and it very easily slips underneath the catch to lift the catch to release the plunger. So I find this a much smoother action with a much nicer release. And in fact, it cost me nothing because this little piece of plastic, I cut off the trigger lock from a Nexus Pro. So if you're removing this lock, make use of some of that plastic, cut it off and glue it on, and give yourself a free hair trigger mod. Okay, next thing is this magazine release lever. It lets you remove your full length magazine or your half length adapter. I will never use full length darts with this blaster, so I will always have the adapter in place and never need to remove it. So having this lever extend below the trigger guard, it doesn't do any good. I'm never going to use it. I will only ever hit it by accident. So to avoid that, what I've done is basically cut off that lower part. You can see here I've sanded it quite smooth. It's just cutting in line with this piece here. Now when it's in place, it's pretty much all inside the shell. If I ever did need to remove the magazine, there's still space to fit a screwdriver in to lever it up, but I don't expect that to ever happen, so I'm happy with a nice smooth finish without leaving a hole in the bottom of my blaster. Speaking of magazine adapters, this comes apart with 4 screws. So you can see that there are 2 knobs in this adapter. One lines up with the stock magazine. The lower one lines up with the Talon magazines. I won't use the stock magazine, I only use Talons. So I don't actually need this top knob. All it can do is provide an extra point of friction when I'm loading the magazines or removing them. So you can simply remove that and just go with the one. If you're going to do the opposite and use the original but not Talons, then simply do the opposite. Pop this one out and keep this one in place. The lever works the same for both, so that's an easy thing to do. That should make your reloads a bit smoother just by reducing some friction. Otherwise, I'll keep this as it is. Again, hex or socket cap screws holding that together. Okay, let's talk about barrels. This is the original barrel that comes with the Max Striker. It just sits in the front of the breech part like so. It's not sealed or anything. It also isn't really smooth on the inside. So if you're going to use a stock barrel, I would just take a knife or something sharp and give yourself a slightly chamfered edge, or you can use a tool like this and just green that out a little. Now, I actually will not be using this stock barrel, and I'll show you why. Our group uses Worker Gen 3 darts, and there's no seal. They just slip right through. So that's not going to give me the performance I want. Now, your choice of barrel will vary quite a lot depending on how you're going to use your blaster, where you're going to use it, what darts you'll use, and the performance you're looking for. So there's no one best barrel solution that's going to suit everybody. It's very individual, as I say. One thing you can always do, though, is improve the seal at the front of this breech piece. A few options are to epoxy the barrel in place. That'll give a nice good seal. It'll mean you won't be able to take it apart again if you want to do something different. So what I prefer to do is take some Teflon tape, wrap it around the end a couple of times. That now has a pretty good seal, and then electrical tape around the outside. Just hold it firm so it doesn't come loose when you're using it. That'll give you a really good seal at this point, regardless of what barrel type or length you choose to use. For me though, I've built this hybrid barrel out of the same length of 16mm aluminium with 17/32 brass 20 centimeters in length glued inside. And hopefully you can see this edge, I've put a nice angle on it. So when the darts are passing into the barrel through the breech, there's absolutely no rough edges to catch on as a dart goes in. And this brass is a really good seal for the darts that our group uses. So that's why I've gone with this 17/32 brass. And the length of aluminium I've got is just enough to sit inside the muzzle piece at the front here, so that's firm. And of course the extra length of brass I've got protrudes out the front, and that's where I'll attach my scar. Okay, so I can put this together now. So the barrel can slide through there. That's good. This bit at the front just slips over like so. Now we've got our lock at the top that I do want to keep. Sits like so. Catch there. Trigger is there. I got my short magazine release piece there. Now, one thing I found with the magazine adapter, obviously it's meant to slide in and out, but that means it's a little bit loose inside the shell. Because I'm not going to be removing it, I don't need it to do that. I want it to hold a bit more firmly. So what I'm going to do is wrap a bit of electrical tape around, and that's going to go into these slots, and that'll be crimped together and should hold the adapter more tightly when the shell is together. Okay, so that's not going to be visible from the outside. Pop this into place. And yeah, that's nice and firm. So when the screws are holding that together, that's not going to go anywhere. Okay, I'll just put the rest of the screws in this now. Okay, and then the grip. So that again has 4 screws. So then up the front, of course, we've got this piece that screws onto the slide. Okay, let's talk about spring. So the spring that comes with the blaster it's quite a beefy spring, really. Obviously, it gives good performance out of the box. The 2 main ways of improving the performance, though, is to either replace this spring with a slightly stronger one, or to use spacers. Now, if you purchase this blaster in Australia from Blastertech, it'll come supplied with a number of these spacers. And so what these do is, instead of the spring sitting all the way inside this end cap, these can add 10 millimeters of additional compression, 15, 20, 25, 30, and they're installed just by slipping on like that. And then you've got that much additional compression for your spring, and that bumps up the FPS. Of course, you can make your own spacer to do the same job, whether out of metal tube or PVC pipe, or print your own of these. But like I say, if you have purchased in Australia from Blastertech, you'll get some of these for free. Can't beat that. Anyway, I'll put this together with just the stock spring for now. I generally don't bother putting the last screw in place here for a couple of reasons. One, I then don't need a screwdriver to be able to swap out and put these spacers in if I need to. The cap stays in place pretty well all by itself. You can see there's a little locking bit of plastic, the orange on the red here, but also when you've got a stock in place, there's even less chance of it flying loose. So what I've been doing is, with these spacers, whether I need them or not, I just stick them in the back of the stock there. They don't really add any weight to the blaster at all. So if I ever do want to swap over, I've got everything I need right here without having to go to a toolkit. Okay, looking at externals now. So this stock, I don't know if it's a genuine Magpul. I think probably not. I got this off AliExpress. So I like this shape. It's nice and slim. I've got this press-in sling mount that slots in like that. Up the front, I like using this ergonomic foregrip. One thing you do need to be aware of is when the blaster is fully primed, that you don't attach a foregrip that is going to bump against the front here. If I have that in place just in line with this first slot, about there. I know I've got enough clearance. There we are. So of course, removing the trigger lock means I can deprime, but keeping the slide lock means once I'm all the way forward, this is fixed in place. It's not going to move the bolt back and try and load a second dart. To deprime, I just press that in, slide goes back, and deprime as normal. This grip is textured, but it's slippery plastic that's going to get sweaty on a hot day. So I've got this rubber grip, again just bought off Ali. And so that goes on quite nicely. So I've got a comfortable non-slip grip there. For sights, I like these flip-up Rhino iron sights. So they just slide on normally. There we are. So yeah, spring-loaded. I think it looks pretty cool. If you are putting a sight on the back, just remember to keep this little window available in case you do need to deprime if you're using this priming lock. Otherwise, that's pretty much ready to go. The last thing is my scar. So a Blastertech Mark II scar. This is the 17/32 size, of course. It's ported, it's adjustable, it's reliable, it just works really well. Now at the bottom, you'll see a little window here. What that's for is when you slide this onto your brass, you can see how far to put it until the brass is visible, so you don't jam it on too hard and end up cutting your strings. Fits nicely within this front muzzle piece. So this blaster is done. Blastertech scar, ergonomic foregrip, pop-up Rhino iron sights, Magpul CTR stock with spring spacers inside, a pop-in sling mount, rubberized grip. The mag adapter isn't going anywhere. It's for talons only. My mag release here doesn't protrude at all, so I'm not going to accidentally loosen. The safety lock is disabled, but it's flush with both sides. And my trigger has an adjusted angle that's nice and light on the catch. So releases really easy. Here's my ladybird friend back again. Okay, I think we'll go outside now and get some numbers over the chronograph. Okay, let's get some numbers from the Max Striker. So a reminder, I've got 20 centimeters of 17/32 brass in place, Blastertech scar turned to 90-degree twist. I'll start off with the stock spring just as it is, and then I'll try a few of the different spaces and we'll see how that translates to high FPS. And as usual, I'll be using Worker Gen 3s because that's what our local group uses. That's what I've tuned the blaster for. Okay, that's pretty good, all around 150. Now, 10mm spacer. You can see how simple this is to swap over. In it goes. And we'll get another 5. That was the 10mm spacer. Let's try with the 20. So there you go. Quick example of how easy it is to dial in your FPS up or down just by swapping out a spacer, whether you want to fit underneath a particular event's FPS cap or whether you want to go all out for the highest FPS you can. It's a really quick and easy way of adjusting the power of this blaster. Okay, let's see how it goes for accuracy. Okay, here we are at 50 feet from the target as usual. I'm going to do 10 shots with the stock spring just as it is, and then 10 more shots with the 20mm spacer. And we'll see how that affects our accuracy. The Blastertech Scar has a 90-degree, that's 1/4 twist. I've got no sight, I'm just sort of eyeballing it, so let's see how we go. Okay, they were really all on target. And with a 20mm spacer in the back, let's see how we go. Prime is a little bit tougher, as you'd expect. Bullseye to finish with. So as expected, at both FPS, at this distance we're super accurate. If we're stretching out to 70, 80, 100 feet, that's when we'd see the spacer giving higher FPS, improving the accuracy just because of the extra range. So there you have it, that's the Max Striker with a few easy, cheap or free mods that anybody can do. Let me know if you find these helpful or if there are other simple mods that you've put in place yourself. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.